Hi guys, welcome back to my channel where the Gnomes live. This is Sharon Oyella, and today we're going to be building this chair that has hot glue mushrooms installed. So half of the mushrooms are installed in the chair and the other half of the mushrooms are installed on the outside of the chair. I'm going to show you both methods in this video. In the last video I showed you how to do hot glue mushrooms. I'm going to repeat that again, but this time I'm going to show you how to do the chair and how to install the lights in the chair. If you missed my last video, I did explain this as an ongoing project. So this chair that I'm showing you how to build today is for a bear that I'm going to present on my other channel, because I also have a crochet channel. And I've made this box that opens up, and the box itself will become like a display case for that bear. Okay, so the box is not ready yet as of today, but as soon as it is, it will be linked in the pinned comment below. Along with the pinned comment below, you're going to find detailed timestamps so you can jump around the video as freely as you wish. Alright guys, let's get started. I'm going to give you the supplies list. The chair itself is made out of foil, and I'm using heavy duty foil. If you only have light duty on hand, then you'll use more than I did in this video. Make sure it doesn't say non-stick foil because we're going to be using masking tape. We want to make sure the masking tape can stick to it. We will also be using paper towel. I use a 2-ply. If you only have 3-ply on hand, then you'll just have to remove one of those layers. And white glue. I'm using Elmer's glue wall, but school glue would work as well. And I used about a cup, maybe a cup and a half for this one chair. And to get those wonderful bark colors, I'm using black, burnt umber, cinnamon brown, and soft suede. You don't have to get soft suede. You can use beige or any tan color. And to add that natural look, I'm going to use some dollar store moss. You could also get moss in your local forest as well. And for the mushrooms, now those are all made out of hot glue and string lights, so let's take a look at what we need for those. First of all, you're going to need lights. I get mine at the dollar store. These are submersible, so they're okay with water, and they are battery pack lights. And of course, you're going to need a hot glue gun. This is a high temperature hot glue gun, and you want to have something that you can make the mushroom caps on. So you can use a baking tin, parchment paper, or a silicone mat like this one on the left there I got in the dollar store. And hot glue sticks, of course. Now take a look at these. The caps and the stems are the exact same color. They're just a regular hot glue stick, and same as the caps on these ones. But if you take a look at the stems, they're actually different. They're crystal clear, and that's because I had bought crystal clear hot glue sticks by accident. And they worked out great for the stems, but I'm not sure that they would work so well with the caps because you have to connect the cap to the stem and you might see that little connection there. So just keep that in mind when you're buying your supplies. I am going to quickly show you the first seat that I made and how I came about with that shape. Okay, so I just put some foil, just crumpled up foil inside the box that I'm going to be putting the seat into. Then I pressed my bear on top and pushed it down so it creates a custom sort of fit for the bear. And this was my finished chair right here. And then I add more material, of course, and then paint it. I'm going to show you this one again at the end of this video and show you how I add on to it. Okay, so this is the second seat that I've made. Again, this is all just foil. Okay, there's nothing else in there, just foil. And I added bits at a time. So I was building it. I didn't really have a complete thing in my mind made up before I started. So I kind of just kept building onto it as I was making the shape of the chair. And I use hot glue and foil. And then the next step is to cover up all the foil with the masking tape. So once you're happy with the shape of your chair and you got all your little details in there, then you cover it all up with masking tape. And then the next step is we're going to do a layer of paper towel. So this is Elmer's glue wall. You can use school glue as well. Just pour it in there. That's about a cup, maybe a cup and a half of glue. And then this glue is kind of on the thicker side, and just to make it a little bit easier to work with, I'm just going to add a bit of water here. You can see that was about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 tablespoons of water. The more water you add, the more runny it's going to be. So you kind of get a feel for it. There's no real recipe to follow. And this is the 2-ply paper towel. I've stacked them. I'm going to rip them in half. And now each stack I'm going to tear down all sides. So in the end, you're left with 4 sides that are torn. And then I want to have a smaller stack like this for doing little detail work. Then you want to protect your table, so I put down parchment paper. You can use anything, of course. Yeah, you want to catch that glue as it drips. Then take a piece and lay it on top of the glue, fold the dry sides together, and pull off the excess glue. And now I'm going to get glue on the other side. So dipping my hand in and getting that glue all over. So in the end, you have a piece that is saturated with the glue. And of course, you can do the design however you want to do yours. On both of my seats, I didn't want too much texture on the inside of the seat itself. So I'm just laying the paper towel over the masking tape and I'm just pressing it all into place. So you want to work out any air bubbles. So again, this is just for the seat part, just adding the paper towel and getting it all worked in there. But where I want texture, like on the back piece, I'm going to make texture with the paper towel. So lay it down, and now we're going to squish it up side to side, creating lines like you would find in bark. So bark-like texture. And we'll come back to that chair in a minute. I'm just doing another piece here. This is a piece of cardboard that I just put masking tape over top just to keep the cardboard from getting saturated with the glue. And I'm just preparing my paper towel. So I just want to show you the overlapping here. So I'm creating my texture. And now I'm ready for my second piece. Now laying that over, making sure to overlap the first piece. And now we're going to work it all in just like we did the first piece. So creating those lines. And I'm wrapping around the edges, of course, of the cardboard. And there we go. This piece is ready for drying. Now, I always dry mine under fans. If you have a nice hot sunny day, that would work as well. This will take quite a while to dry if you don't use something to help it. All right, so here's my chair that I was working on. And I let it sit under the fan for a little bit just to get it to dry to the touch. And then I could continue working on these more detailed areas where I created those holes and the arms of the chairs as well. So I'm using smaller pieces of paper towel, as you can see, and I'm just working these little pieces into the other bark. And then I let that dry under the fan again until it was dry to the touch. You can see parts of this is completely dry and parts of it is not, but as long as you can touch it, doesn't stick to your fingers, you can go ahead and paint it. So let's get started. All my bark starts off with a black paint first, and on a piece that's larger like this and has a lot of texture in it, I want to do a black wash. All that means is it's 50% water and 50% paint. So I've already poured water into my bottle here, and you can see how runny this paint is. And that will just make this step go so much quicker because that paint just kind of runs into all the little nooks and crannies. If you have a really small piece of bark, you don't have to water it down, of course. But on larger pieces like this, putting water in that paint is going to make your job a lot easier. Now, you'll find that sometimes the paper towel that you're using, the squares or the little design will show through. If you have one of those pieces and that is happening, I'm going to show you how to cover that up. We're going to make some texture paint. So I'm going to use 2 ounces of black paint. You got to make sure that this is not washable paint. I'm using straight acrylic craft paint, but this is not washable paint. If you use washable paint, this step will become a crumbly mess, okay? So just a regular craft paint. And now I'm going to use baking soda. Now, baking soda is one way, but you can also use baby powder. If you use baking soda like I do, you're going to have a sodium film left showing after the piece is dry, like this black coat is dry. So into that paint, 2 ounces of paint, I put in 5 or 6 heaping teaspoons of baking soda. And I'm going to mix that up really well. And this will make this paint very thick. So you can see my squares there on that piece. I'm just going to do half of this back of the chair so you can see the difference. Now this paint, you want to keep working it. You don't want to just paint it on because it gets very smooth. So you want to make sure you're putting texture in there with your brush. So it just takes a couple of minutes. Now this paint, it starts to dry, it gets a little easier to work with. But as it's really wet, it just goes on very smooth. So you can see I'm kind of dabbing my brush here and there, and I keep adding lines with my brush. And then it's helpful to take a thinner brush, the back end of a thin brush, and just make more lines. So just going up and down, just to cut down that smooth look of the texture paint. And then we'll let that dry. And take a look at the difference. Now you can see the film of the sodium showing through, but look at the difference between the sides. There are no squares on that side, and you can see all the squares of the paper towel on the other side. And on the inside seat, now I didn't make any texture with the paper towel, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the texture paint. I'm going to put a nice thick coat on the inside. Once that's coated, then I'm going to take the back end of that skinny brush again and then create lines with my brush. And to get rid of that sodium film, all I do is paint over it with straight paint, all right? I know some of you are going to be worried about that sodium eating through the paint, and I know that's a valid concern. You can research it. I've been doing this for a couple years now, and all of my pieces have stood up the test of time. But if you are concerned, then just switch to baby powder. Don't use the baking soda. But as you can see here, painting over it gets rid of that sodium film. All right, my friends, now that we've troubleshooted on how to get rid of that paper towel design, now I'm going to show you how to paint bark, okay? And the next clip is going to show you how to do that without using the texture paint. The texture paint is only if you want to cover up paper towel design. So let's get started. Once the piece is dry to the touch, you can go ahead and paint it. Now this glue is still wet underneath. I can see that because it's all white. But once it's dry to the touch, you can go ahead and paint. We're going to start with black paint first. And then we'll set it underneath the fan and let it dry. Once that's dry, the next step is burnt umber. Now we don't want to do a solid color of burnt umber. We want to just lightly brush this over because we want a little bit of that black to show from behind. So I'm not doing a solid coat. I want a bit of that black to show. And there we go. Now we're going to let that dry. Once that's dry, the next step is cinnamon brown. And again, we don't want a solid color of cinnamon brown. We're going to let a little bit of that burnt umber show from behind. So I'm just lightly brushing. Transferring quite a bit of that color over. Now once that's dry, the next step is like a beige, or this one's soft suede, but I can use beige as well. I'm not going to be dipping my brush into this paint. I'm using a chip brush. A feather brush would also work. I'm just lightly rubbing over the top of the bottle. As you can see, I just want to pick up a little bit of that tint and then just dry brush that on. And like magic, I love this step because it makes it come to life and just picks up the protruding parts of the paper towel and gives that highlight. And then we're going to take some black and we're just going to shadow out some of the dips and crevices here. So I'm using a smaller brush. And then just lightly, just anywhere I see bigger dips, I'll just shadow those out with the black paint. And this will add a lot of depth to your piece. And you can see, guys, by the small piece that I'm painting here, I didn't use any texture paint and it looks great. So you have to decide from piece to piece when you're going to be using texture paint to cover up those squares. This little piece here, it looks fantastic on its own. So let's take a look at the chair again. And remember, I did the texture paint on the chair, but I'm going to show you every stage of painting after that. So here it is with the black wash and then the texture paint on top. And now this is a coat of burnt umber, and you can see quite a bit of that black showing from behind. Now I'll set this under the fan to dry. And while that's drying, I just get the excess paint off my paintbrush. I'm not going to clean the brush. I just run it back and forth over the paper towel, just as you saw there. And drying time isn't that long, actually, just a couple of minutes. Now I'm going to get the cinnamon brown. And then same thing, I'm going to show you what it looks like after I've painted this on. So here's the coat of cinnamon brown. You can see the black and the burnt umber showing from behind. And now I'll let that dry under the fan. And again, just wiped off my brush, got off the excess paint. And now this is the beige color, or soft suede. And I just dipped the tip of the brush in, and now I'm getting the majority of the paint off. Because remember, we just want to transfer over just a bit of that paint to highlight all the protruding parts of the bark. And just like the smaller piece, now we're going to use the black paint with a smaller brush and just get into all the little crevices, anywhere you want to create a shadow and some depth. And this is a fun part of the process as well, because you can see it really adds a lot of depth as you go around with this shadowing technique. All right, my friends, the chair is done and it's ready to have the lights installed, but keep in mind that the materials that we made the chair out of can take up to a week, sometimes a little bit longer to totally cure. So it's going to get harder over time. All right, so if it's a little bit soft, don't worry about that. It will get harder over time. It's going to be easier to poke holes into the chair in the first day or so. Also keep in mind that you want to leave a little bit of length there, like this, so you can always have access to that battery pack. All right, guys, we're going to get started. I'm going to be working on the chair on the left, and on one side of the chair, I'm going to be poking holes and pulling the wire through those holes. And on the other side of the chair, I just lay the wire along the chair itself. So either method will work just fine. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways of covering up the wire when you're all done. So let's get started. So using my awl, I'm going to poke a hole where I want my first cluster of mushrooms to go. So I'm just going to poke a hole right through. All right, so my first string there, I just poked a hole with my awl. So I'm going to bring the string through. And like I said, you can do as many mushrooms as you want in one spot. For this one, I'm doing 3. So I'm going to pull through 3 bulbs. And then the bulbs you want at the top of the stem always. So the first bulb right here, and the second and third and so on are all 4 inches apart. And you can make these stems as long or as short as you want to. Okay, so the front one, the front bulb is going to be a mushroom stem. The second one, I'm going to fold it over so the bulb's at the top, and now I'm going to twist those 2 wires together. And now I'll twist it with the first one. And I'm going to do another one here, but it has to be shorter, so I'll bring it up and fold that wire with the bulb at the top, and now shorten that wire. Bringing it down, and now I'll just twist the bottom together, creating a little stem. And then making sure those other wires are all twisted together, and there you go. That's my cluster of 3, and I can stick that stem into the hole that I made with my awl. And now I'll just put a dot of glue inside that hole to hold those wires in place, and I'll let that cool so that stem will stay placed when I start working on it. And now for the rest of the string, I'm going to poke a hole here, and I'm going to pull the rest of the string all the way through. So I'm working the string as a double, right? There's no end to the string now, it's just one big loop. So I'm pulling that loop through the arm, and those mushrooms are working. I'm working them backwards, going up through the arm. So I can poke a hole all the way through, along the arm, and then up along the back here. And that way you don't see any of the wire on the outside. And of course, you don't have to do it this way. You don't have to poke holes all the way across. I'm just giving that option because it is a good option to have. And when you're ready to add the hot glue over the stems, you want to just run up and down the entire stem, including the bulb. And this is buildable, so you can let the first layer cool, and then you can add another layer over top. One thing to keep in mind is if your glue gun is really hot, that this will become a drippy mess. So you got to find that right temperature to do the stems with. And then on the other side, you can see I did not pull the wire through the chair itself. I did poke holes in some of the areas where I could stick the stems into just to keep them stable enough to work on. But you can also hold them in place with just hot glue. So you don't have to poke holes, but sometimes holes will help some of those stems stay in place while you work on them. So one thing to keep in mind is if you're going to use hot glue to attach the moss, use a tool as well to push the moss into that glue, because that glue is so hot you don't want to burn yourself. And even though you think you might have a barrier between you and that glue with the moss, it still could seep through and burn you. And you want to make sure that it's firmly pushed into that glue, because you don't want to have moss falling off along the way. And for those unused bulbs, which you are going to have along the way because some of them are just going to be too short to do anything with, you can cover it with moss, of course, but you'd want to dim down that light first. So I'm going to use black electrical tape and just wrap it around that bulb. If you don't have black electrical tape, you can also paint the bulb black using craft paint. It just takes a couple of layers of drying in between. All right, now that I have those lights taken care of, I'm going to add a piece of paper towel over top to cover up that wire and just work this in and make it into more bark. And instead of doing a black wash, I'm just going to, right over top, I'm using my texture paint. This is such a small area, I can work it in. If you're using texture paint on a large, very large piece, and I've done this before, you still want to do a black wash first so you can get the paint in all those little nooks and crannies. But because this is a small piece, I can go ahead and start off with my texture paint. And of course, once that's dry, then you can go ahead and do the other bark colors, just like I showed you in the previous clips. And then when you're all done, you can't tell exactly where you added that new bark. And the same goes for if you wanted to add to your chair after it's already done. Like for myself, I change my mind quite often, and I wanted to add to this chair, make the back a little taller and give it some arms. So I'm just going to hot glue some foil into place, and then I'm going to cover it up with the masking tape, making sure to overlap the masking tape onto the old bark. And the same for the next step when we do the paper towel. You want to make sure that you're overlapping so that when the paper towel is dry, it is now one solid piece with the original bark. And as you can see, I didn't have to paint that entire thing, just where I added the new bark. And as you can see, once it's all done and dried, you can't even tell where we added those new pieces. Alright guys, let's make some mushroom caps. On my table, I'm going to have a bowl of cold water and a bowl of hot water. It's hot, warm water from my hot water tap. And then my little marble here, this was, I made this in a previous project. This is a crystal ball I had made for a miniature witch. So I'm going to use this to shape my hot glue gun, my hot glue caps over. All right, I'll show you that as we get set up here. I'm going to preheat my glue gun for about 4 minutes. So I'm just going to set my timer and let that glue gun get nice and hot. Now I taped down my mat only because it had a wrinkle in it. So the first cap, I'm going to squeeze out about 3 pumps here. So my glue gun is now preheated. And then my second cap is about a pump and a half there. And then a small cap, I just 1 pump will do. Now I'm going to let these sit. Do not touch them because it'll just mess up your cap. I'm going to set this timer for about 3 minutes. And remember, this is going to vary from hot glue gun to hot glue gun. You got to play around with these times. So around 2 minutes, I'm going to pick up the smallest mushroom cap there. I'm just going to show you, nice and flat. I'm going to stick it in the warm water so it doesn't stick to my fingers, but I don't want it to cool, right? So that's why I'm using the warm water. And then immediately shaping it over my marble. So I'm pressing down very firmly, shaping all the way around, and there we go. That first one is shaped. Now I can just set that aside. It's already cooled, so I'm not going to worry about dipping it in the cold water. Now the medium one there is about 2.5 minutes. Dip it in the warm water, and now quickly shape it over that marble. I'm pressing down nice and firm. And those of you paying attention to the timer, I'm just going to speed it up on my end here. And we got a nice shape there. I'm going to dip it in the cold water to get it to cool down completely before I set it aside. It doesn't take much, just a little dip will do. And then my third one here, it wasn't quite done. As you can see, I kind of messed it up. And this will happen to you as well, so that's why I say you have to play around with the times. I do try to save it here because it just had a little bit of a bump there. And it turned out okay. I could have used it, but I'm going to redo it and show you how it should look when we're done. All right, so I'm going to dry off this mat. You don't want any water on your mat when you pump the glue on because it'll just cause bubbles. So I'm going to try this again for a big one, squeezing 3 times. Now I'll set my timer. So there's 3 minutes. I'm going to let it go because I could see that that hot glue was still kind of cooling down. All right, so 3.5 minutes. I'm going to pick this up very carefully, and we got it that time. Okay, so I'm going to quickly put it in the warm water there, and now I'm going to shape this. So keep in mind, you are going to have to play around with the times because every glue gun is going to have a little bit of a different temperature, and I'm using a high temperature glue gun, remember? So continuing to shape. There we go. That is beautiful. There's no bubbles or anything there. So I'm going to dip it in the cold, get it to cool down, and set it aside. And once you're ready to attach them, all you have to do is just add a dot of hot glue to the top of the stem and then just place the cap on top. And keep in mind that hot glue, of course, will melt if you place the item in a sunny window. Then your hot glue mushrooms will probably melt. They'll also be susceptible to cold temperatures as well. So if it gets really cold, the caps could just pop off and you'd have to glue them back on. So here's my other little guy here from the Wild Things. His pattern is free on my other channel. But anyway, I put that hole in the bottom of that back of that chair for his tail. So he fits in there quite comfortably. And that will bring us to the end of this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel before you leave so you know when the next video is available. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.